Part 2. The Grayling Fae. Chapter 18. A King Betrayed. Royal Circle.
Princess Vahlronia. The king's bed was a place I could too easily tumble into. It wasn't as if I didn't feel the pull toward it with every breath I took, as elemental as the ocean luring the tides away from the comfort of the shores. It wasn't as if my heart and body didn't ache for Kylan, near to the point of breaking. Or the deepest desire of my heart wasn't a seat at his side, a throne next to his. Power, beauty, love, lust, desire. I would have to be a fool not to crave them all, or do absolutely anything to get them, even if that meant temporarily denying my bodily pleasures and needs. Royal Circle was filled with perfect beauties, any one of whom would tumble into bed with the king with no hesitation at all. And many had, including my own sister, hoping to be his mistress, hoping to steal his heart. But what was too easily won was also easily cast aside, even if there was fun to be had in the journey. Easily valued as nothing. Worthless. A fleeting pleasure, even if the prince in line for the throne did take you as his mistress. As my sister and father had discovered when the heir to the throne had tired of my sister and sent her home shortly after his father died and he became king. My father had wisely counseled me before he'd sent me to the capital to win the young new king's heart and hand that I mustn't repeat my sister's mistake. In an ocean of beauties, my most desirable quality was my virginity and unattainability. My utter devotion to saving myself for the king and the king alone. I was to be the lush fruit just out of reach. The perfect peach of temptation. Beautiful. Ripe. Alluring. But pristine enough, pure enough, virginal enough in appearance at least, to make queen. I was to encourage the chase and profess my devotion, but maintain my chastity. No easy task, given Kylan's lusty reputation and my increasing temptation. How long could I hold him at bay? My father had an unquenchable desire for power and limitless, untamable, unbridled aspirations for me. He'd bred me for beauty and intelligence, wedding and bedding 4 wives before I came along, the daughter up to his exacting standards. The unmarried daughter just the right age to ensnare a young king. Beauty alone was not enough, as he'd learned with my older sister. When she became pregnant, Kylan sent her home. He then married her off to an old noble and sent her into exile with him on the distant lands he bestowed upon them as payment to raise his royal bastard as their own. Father claimed he sent my sister to the palace with hopes she'd succeed. I had to believe that was true, but I often thought she was his test case and his spy. His first attempt, but not his main plan or asset. That he'd sent her to discover the young king's passions and weaknesses so that he wouldn't fail with me. He trained me at his knee to be cunning and political, to think like a leader and a conqueror. He'd beat me into loyalty and submission to him. He'd sent me to his courtesans and concubines to learn how to flirt and flatter, how to please a man. He had my sister teach me all she knew about how to please the king. There's no need to shed blood when taking over a kingdom, he'd told me. Much easier to conquer it from inside, using the heart if possible. Lust if not. Patience is the key. I've waited nearly 20 years to make my move. I've cultivated the perfect weapon, you, my darling. Don't disappoint me. Be the great woman I know you are. Entice the young king into marrying you despite the odds. Royal Circle has so long devoted itself to physical beauty such that its value is negligible now. It's only a basic qualification to sit at the table. He'd grabbed my chin and stared into my eyes. Lucky for us, you're an exquisite beauty, like the wife I had to take to make you. He let me go, roughly. But nothing stirs the ardor and the imagination, nothing puts the bellows to the fires of love and longing like a good chase. Like feeling the prize has been well and hard won. To a man who has everything, the one thing he can't have becomes priceless. A man will do anything for a woman if given the right motivation. Even risk his kingdom. Father then sent me to Royal Circle after my sister's return. Sent me to be the unattainable fruit. The fact that 4 provinces and their selectresses stood between our province and me and the throne had never daunted my father for an instant. He had begun whispering in the old king's ear, then Kylan's ear, and the ears of their advisors for years that the law of succession was antiquated and needed to be abandoned. Father was behind the drive to abolish it. He funded it. It had been his passion for as long as I could remember. But the old king died too soon. Or maybe the movement and the wheels of the law were too slow. The law remained in place and enforced. Not even that stopped Father. 4 selectresses before me were no obstacle for him. But for me, I was getting older. I'd waited nearly a year already, daily promising pleasures as juicy as a ripe peach. So much so that I wasn't sure I could ever live up to the promise of pleasure that I'd established, waiting for my turn to be chosen selectress. Magic. I was beginning to think that I would need potent magic to make the marriage bed all I'd promised it would be. Total ecstasy. I wrote to Father, asking him to prepare to pay the price for it and find a witch or wizard who could manage the spell. If a marriage didn't happen soon, whispers would begin that I was getting too old to be queen. That there were too many risks that I wouldn't be able to produce an heir. Time, after all, had to be allowed for a queen to produce enough children to birth a male child. Given she were unfortunate enough to start with girl babies. Daughters suited my father better than war. But it wouldn't suit a king of Kylan's stature. He needed a son. I was by no means old, but I was getting older. Older than people pleased. They wanted the blush of youth on their new queen. They wanted her young enough that the chances of her being despoiled were slim. They wanted a father standing guard over her chastity. They wanted her father to be anyone but my father, whose power and reputation frightened them. Rumors were already flying about my increasingly flirtatious behavior with the king and the time I spent alone with him. Others whispered, wondering why my belly wasn't already round with the king's bastard, like my sister's had been. Even though those in the know knew I hadn't consummated the relationship. They were wearying of defending me. They only did so on the king's behalf and command, not because of any loyalty to me. If one of them got the chance to stab me in the back, they would, should it serve them. I couldn't go on with this game indefinitely. Eventually, it would backfire on me. I had to tread carefully. Very carefully. And I was getting desperate. Soon it would show. Or I would make a mistake and fall victim to my temptation, Kylan. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with him. But when power, wealth, charisma, wit, charm, physical male perfection and beauty and ruthlessness are dropped before you, what's an ambitious woman who wants the throne to do? If my father ever found out, he would be furious and try to beat my love for Kylan out of me. The way Father would see it, love would make me a weak weapon in his arsenal. I prayed he never found out. But it made the fine line I walked even narrower. Sometimes I thought that Kylan was the one who'd put the spell on me. It had long been rumored that the Warmain dynastic line was part Fae. That after the Great Magical War, the first Warmain king had married one of the infamous female Fae from the south. The first queen had been astonishingly beautiful. She birthed beautiful, talented children who lived an unusually long time and had astoundingly robust good health and luck. People say that she never aged a day. That she was as beautiful and young on the day she died as when she wed the king. Everyone wanted her secret to lasting beauty. Even today, merchants sold creams and lotions in the heart of the circle, claiming to be the first queen's original secret recipe. Some historians even claimed that the first queen's beauty started the desire of the nobles in royal circle to pursue beauty with a passion. The history books say she died and was buried in the royal tomb in the cathedral in the heart of royal circle. That the first king built it especially for her. That she was laid out beautifully on a bed of velvet beneath a clear crystal coffin lid. That all who saw her cried and ripped their clothes in genuine grief over her death. But Fae don't die unless they're murdered. The southern Fae are infamous for suddenly abandoning husband and children when they tire of them. But if the conspiracy theories can be believed, the first queen loved the first king. She was forced to leave him only when it became obvious that he was growing old, and she wasn't. When it was becoming clear that she wasn't human. Then she and the king faked her death. There are accounts of witnesses who claim the queen was never buried, that she only slept beneath the crystal sarcophagus and slipped out before it was draped and buried. Then she returned to the Fae kingdom. There are other rumors that each selectress and new queen from the first on were chosen specifically, not only for their beauty, but because they had at least some Fae ancestry in their bloodline. That the Fae bloodline fueled the beauty of the people of Royal Circle. The rumors and theories could be true. Or not. I only knew that I had no Fae blood that I knew of, and yet I was almost assuredly going to be the next queen. Due to the human magic of patience and planning, and my father's zeal for power. It was easy to believe that the kings came from Fae stock, given their consistent beauty, intelligence, charm, and almost magical good fortune. Kylan was surely magical in my eyes, an otherworldly creature. I lusted for Kylan. I longed for him. I was furiously jealous when he was with someone else to slake his desire. Desire that I had flamed in him. Enraged to have to sit piously by and watch him publicly fawn and court the selectresses who came in the line of succession before me. Now, finally, he was within reach. I had insisted, absolutely insisted to Kylan that I couldn't go through it again. That I would rather kill myself than watch him court another woman and act as though he would marry her. That I was consumed with jealousy and couldn't live without him much longer. And it was all true. How would I bear it again? I was risking fire and ire again, being in his rooms alone with him. But was it my fault? He'd summoned me. No one refuses the king. What was I to do? Would people prefer I disobey him and be sent to the dungeons? How would that serve my people? He'd sent his servants and courtiers away. He sat in a plush-upholstered chair in the anteroom to his bedchamber. He extended his hand to me.
Come, Vahlronia. Don't play shy with me.
I laughed and walked coyly, slowly toward him, letting my hips sway in a way that made my skirt swish and swirl around my legs, hinting at the shapeliness that lay beneath. Only pretending to be tentative and shy, but letting lust shine freely in my eyes when they met his. This was our game, and he knew how it was played as well as I did. Knew that beneath my dress I wore scandalously scanty, soft, silky lace undergarments meant to entice his touch and ignite his fantasies. Meant to allow him access to my most intimate areas, but not total possession. Meant to be light enough to imagine he could tear them away in the heat of passion, but substantial enough to project the idea of my purity and the need for restraint. The necessity that the barriers be respected in my desire to be his queen. In his desire for me to be his queen. Designed to stimulate his imagination and fuel his lust and fantasies, but only bring him to the edge of reason. Not beyond. Never beyond. The warm, gentle breeze worked in my favor, carrying my perfume toward him. Perfume purchased from traders from the east and filled with exotic scents blended by master perfumers, and cast with spells to stimulate the erotic passions. Perfume my father had paid a king's ransom for. When I got near enough, Kylan grabbed my arm and pulled me playfully onto his lap, managing to lift my skirts so that my bare thighs rested against his hard thighs beneath his hose. He rubbed his nose in my hair.
You smell like 1,000 nights of passion. Like an entire harem in just one woman.
It was the best compliment he could have paid me, and my perfume. I was no shy miss, anyway. But I had to tamp down my nature. Save something for the marriage bed. But someday soon, I wouldn't have to. The whole world would know then that the king was utterly and completely mine. And all the power that went along with my victory. This was the game, and there was power in it even now. I let him think he owned me. But I couldn't let on that I knew more than I should. That I had experience and knowledge of men that an innocent woman wouldn't. I couldn't even let him teach me. It would be too easy for him to get suspicious. Too easy for him to become bored. It would spoil the game anyway. But there was a price to pay. This was only foreplay for him. As soon as I collapsed against him, wanting to cuddle, he would cast me aside and go to the whore or mistress waiting to relieve him in the next room, leaving me with only my jealousy and tortured thoughts for company. It was his way of punishing me for not giving in, even as he respected me for it. There was a knock on the door. "Your Highness? An important missive has arrived from Lord Noblet." His secretary spoke through the closed door. Kylan lifted me off his lap and went to the door. He spoke in hushed tones to his steward. When he closed the door and faced me, his expression was dark. I stopped in my tracks. "What's happened? What's wrong?"
My new selectress is missing in the Douve.
His voice was ice. Missing? My thoughts raced. Missing? Or dead? My heart leapt at the thought. This was the good news I was waiting for. If she's lost in the Douve, she won't last long. Noblet would find her and kill her. His head was on the line if he didn't. Or the monsters of the Douve would do the job for us. Either way was a win. I took a step toward Kylan and looped my arm through his. "This is good news, my love." Kylan's scowl froze my words in my mouth.
She's missing.
He threw my arm off.
And so is my brother. Still,
He pounded his fist into his palm with a loud smack.
no sign of Rylan. Gone. Vanished into thin air.
Kylan balled both fists.
Worse, one of my best warriors was found with his head separated from his body in the spot where he had escorted the girl away from camp so she could relieve herself. But there was no sign of the girl.
No sign? How could that be?
A couple of the men reported seeing flashes of light when she disappeared. Some are claiming they saw Fey warriors. It's as likely they're trying to save their skins as reporting the truth.
His scowl deepened.
Very convenient, all this getting lost in the Douve, where men lose their minds and hallucinations are commonplace.
He paused.
They're either hallucinating, or they're covering for Rylan.
Kylan took a deep breath. He was shaking with anger.
Noblet himself claims she was abducted by the Lightlings. His hide is at stake too. Going through the Douve was Noblet's idea. He was supposed to bring her back here, unharmed. With my brother.
I held my breath, glad Kylan didn't remember, or at least mention, that I had encouraged the idea of going through the Douve too. Still, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Kidnapping the Selectress was tantamount to declaring war. I didn't believe that theory either. Lord Noblet was supposed to have killed her. How had the girl gotten the better of him and escaped? Though my thoughts were scattered and fearful, I arranged them quickly. If that were true, the Lightlings would be fools to return her alive. Or so I hoped. My mind frantically ran through all the strategies and scenarios my father had prepared me for. I was at a loss, unprepared for this turn of events, and secretly furious with Lord Noblet. I did my best to hide my fear and hold my nerves at bay. Kidnapping her would be a declaration of war. The Fairy King is no such fool. If the Fairy King took her, he'd be wise to keep her, hopefully forever, to cover his crime.
Or he'll demand a ransom.
But why would he do that? He has no need. What could we give him that he would want?
My kingdom.
Kylan's voice was flat. You would never surrender that. Not without a fight the Fairy King couldn't win. I fixed my face into a sweet smile. That scenario makes no sense. It's much more likely the girl ran off. Poor peasant people aren't prepared for power. The thought of leaving the country and her people for royal circle was likely terrifying to the poor thing. Too much for her to face. So she bolted at the first opportunity.
A simple girl escaped from a trained warrior into the Douve, a place of terrors.
I spoke gently. Maybe in the poor girl's simple mind, facing the Douve seemed the less frightening option. Fear drives people to do irrational things. At the same time, it can sometimes give people strange, inhuman strength and power. Kylan blew out a breath, but I could see he knew what I was saying was true. It's the misfits and her province's disgrace, not yours. You did your duty and selected a selectress from among their pitiful, ugly lot, even though the idea of a misfit selectress and queen was reprehensible to all of us. Politically unfavorable. Dangerous even. His eyes narrowed. I was convincing him. Encouraged, I continued, the Outlands have been afforded their chance and opportunity to have a queen from their people. It isn't your fault if tragedy struck and their timid selectress ran and disappeared. I took Kylan's hand and squeezed it firmly. Don't you see? She's broken the contract. We're free to marry. The sooner, the better. Kylan shook his head.
She disappeared with my ring on her hand. Like it or not, we're bound now. By law and the bonds of magic. She can't escape. Neither of us can break it. Only death can.
His tortured gaze met mine.
Before I can marry another, I must have either the ring or her body. Or my ring must indicate she's dead.
As he twisted the signet ring on his little finger, he stared at it and his scowl deepened.
My ring is whispering that she's still very much alive. This is my brother's doing.
Kylan's logic was sound enough. But he was mistaken. Rylan was missing. And Rylan didn't trust me. More accurately, he didn't trust my father or the power that my marriage to Kai would give my father over him and the kingdom. I had no doubt Rylan would go to great lengths to stop me from marrying his brother if he could. But Rylan hadn't abducted and absconded with the selectress, hoping he could convince Kylan to marry her and fall in love with her. As if that were possible. The fairy queen had taken Rylan. With my help. We, Lord Noblet, Kylan, and I would have to find the selectress. And Noblet and I would have to kill her without Kylan's knowledge. Before it was too late.